this would be a phenomenal news story if you haven't had
Thank
it
you.
marketed
It is,
already.
yeah.
You know, I can see Susan Hay on Global or someone like that doing a profile piece. And have you had much publicity or?
We have. It's been, we've been really fortunate. So we're a part of an incubator at Ryerson University called the Fashion Zone. And so they have a few different advisors who have really enjoyed what we're doing. And so they've had a few connections, have been able to put us in touch. So we actually have a story coming out in print in the Globe and Mail tomorrow. If you want to look out for that. So yeah, we've been on breakfast television a little bit, CP24. Not global yet, but we'll keep them on the list. We'll reach out.
You know what, I'll send a note to Susan Hay this afternoon after this is over and tell her, look for the Globe and Mail. Just interviewed you. Now it says Aille Design. Is that?
I design.
Yeah, I design. Okay.
Yes.
You're Aille.
I'm Alexa.
You're Alexa, but it goes by Aille is short. Okay, that's all right.
No going by Aille by short.
Yeah, that's so let me ask you, you know, in these sensitive times, the beating on it is, and appropriate times, I might add, you're saying it's Braille. So what part of your outfit can you touch, if I can be diplomatic?
So the way that the Braille is designed is intended more for the wearer to actually be reading all of the Braille. So less of a stranger approaching another stranger and all of a sudden touching their shirt. So on my particular shirt, it's just underneath the collar here. And this beading here, it's created with Swarovski crystal pearls. And it says, fashion is for everyone. Yeah, and so we use the Swarovski pearls to make sure that we have those connotations of luxury and desire, especially when we're talking about topics such as disability and inclusivity, really making sure that we can bring as much beauty and appeal to these types of products and really change the overall perspective of what adaptive clothing and inclusion can mean within fashion.
Would this be an opportunity then for an intro?
Further. Sorry.
No, this is awesome.
Website
it's so awesome. I'm just so thrilled that everyone is meeting here today. I know Moksha Canada Foundation is, we're actually doing an impromptu conversation for those of you that are tuning in to us today for Spotlight on Community. And we're just about to introduce our guests for Spotlight on Community, a very new program through Moksha Canada Foundation. And what you're hearing here is a very wonderful, spontaneous conversation between our guest speakers and panelists. And I'm just so thrilled to be a part of this today. Before we introduce and carry on, I'd love to carry on with the conversation if you don't mind. And I'll just introduce Moksha Canada Foundation to our listeners and viewers today so they know what's happening with Spotlight on Community series. And then we'll just fly away with our wonderful conversation and be a part of that process. So thank you very much. And for those of you that are tuning in, we are Moksha Canada Foundation. We're excited to launch this new weekly community Spotlight on Community series. The purpose of the program is to raise awareness and find creative ways to address issues that affect our diverse communities across Canada. Moksha Canada Foundation is a registered not-for-profit community organization which works towards ensuring the well-being of individuals, families, and diverse communities in Canada through the provision of essential services, community development, art, cultural projects, and programs. We at Moksha Canada believe in the philosophy of connect, create, and participate. We also acknowledge and understand the importance of celebrating multiculturalism, respecting diversity, and having inclusive approaches to service delivery. I am thrilled today to have amazing guests on hand. And we have David Onley, and we have Stephanae McCoy and Aille Design. And I'm just going to pick up on the conversation where they were at. And I wondered if, David, if you could jump in with your next thought for Aille Design and Alexa there.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. First of all, it's such a privilege to be with you. And I'm just blown away by the creativity of Aille Design. I see this operating on so many levels. And so for people who, were listening to the earlier part of the conversation before the formal introduction, perhaps we just pick up there, but and just continue on, because what it emphasizes again to me, to bring some flesh and bones to cold statistics, is that 22% of the population, according to Statistics Canada in its most recent survey, are individuals with some kind of a disability that affects their daily functioning in life. when the immediate family members of those individuals are included, and that's either side of their respective generation, it climbs to 53% of the population are affected by one or more conditions. So right now we can say with complete certainty that the majority of Canadians today, 5th of March 2021, are affected in some way by disability, either physical, emotional, or so-called invisible disabilities. But those so-called invisible disabilities, whether it's epilepsy or whether it's Crohn's disease or whatever it is that one cannot see, is still nonetheless significantly limiting in daily functioning. The problem is, and it continues to be a major problem in our society, is that individuals with disabilities tend to be ignored or tend to be seen as other than. In the course that I teach at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, called The Politics of Disability, which is offered each fall, I use the book by Tanya Tchaikovsky of the Aille Institute, and the book is called Rethinking Normalcy. And you have to let that title sink in for a moment or two, as the 21 essays that she and her life partner, Rod Michalko, and several other people have contributed to the book. What they all, in an underlying way, address is that we have to rethink what normal is. And the ultimate conclusion of the 21 essays, really, without it being stated, and this is part of what my class is all about, is what is the underlying theme, is that there is no such thing as normal. There's this narrow band that advertisers and media target, which is kind of that 18 to maybe 32, if that's not, quote, too old, who are physically fit, have no emotional problems, have lots of money to spend, don't have any issues with younger people, members of their society, don't have any issues with older members of their family, and just blithely sail along with not a care in the world. That is a minority, a very, very distinct minority, and yet it is characterized as what's normal in our society. All of that to say, what I am just struck by iDesign is the brilliant concept underlying it here, that one can take embedded Swarovski jewelry and components, put it into some piece of fashion, and have a statement for the user as to what it is that they're wearing. But, you know, I might suggest maybe there's a second line to it, which is a special romantic message for the significant other in that person's life, so that it's hidden in plain sight. So lots of possibilities and lots of opportunities. And I just salute iDesign for coming up with it.
Thank you so much, David. That's very sweet of you. And to your point, with so many individuals with disabilities being considered as other, that's something that's really important to us to really change those misconceptions. And that was one of the biggest reasons that we really started what we were doing. When it comes to fashion, there are very few indications of inclusivity.
Yes.
A lot of times when you think about inclusive fashion, you start to think about increased sizing, which is great. More recently, we've started to discuss race, age, and sexual orientation. But even when the conversation in fashion is directly related to inclusion, individuals with disabilities are still completely overlooked.
Yes.
With all the research that I've done, they're very rarely considered consumers, let alone consumers of fashion. So it was incredibly important to me to make sure that while we were creating this line, that we put this community at the forefront. So we work directly with the community to create all of our pieces. And then in furthering that gap, we really make sure that these are pieces that can truly be worn by absolutely anyone. So we also work with a group of sighted individuals who really love fashion to make sure that we can increase that aesthetic appeal, to make sure that these are pieces that can be seen as fashionable, but they're also functional. And then in return can empower a completely marginalized community. So Stephanae McCoy, who's on the call here, she's a blind individual. She's absolutely fabulous, has an incredible sense of style, and She runs a blog and platform called Bold Blind Beauty, which really helps to empower the community and share these stories. So we've worked closely with Steph to get more insight about what it means to look and feel as being a part of the blind and visually impaired community, because there are so many misconceptions, even just individuals that we've met along this process. The accusations of someone maybe not actually being visually impaired or lying about their disability because they're able to walk great in a pair of high heels, or because their eyes don't appear to be glossed over, or they're not wearing sunglasses. There are so many misconceptions of what it means and looks to feel blind that it's been really incredible to go through this process, even just from an advocacy standpoint and building that education about what having a disability can mean. To your point earlier, so much of the Canadian population does identify as having a disability or are related to someone, and they know directly what their disabilities are like. So this really is something that is affecting all of us. And if we can create a product that in return can build that awareness and really just start to normalize the inclusion of accessibility standards and raising that standard to make sure that everyone is accountable, then that's really just where we need to be moving forward to. So we're really happy to be heading that change.
Well, I sure want to make sure that when I reteach the course this fall, that whether it's in person or online, that you get to attend the class and make a presentation to the students, because they will wrap it up completely. So please,
thank you, David.
Informally invited, and we'll exchange coordinates afterwards.
Thank you. I already accept.
Okay, very good. Done.
That is awesome. That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Shining light. And I was blown away when I discovered iDesign and Alexa and what's going on, and then blown away when I met Stephanae as well. And it speaks to all of what we were speaking to as well, that it affects all of our lives, David. And part of the education process is so important and ever ongoing, right? And that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this topic of discussion today. To learn from you and all of our expert guests.
Diane, and one thing, I was recently looking at the Rise in Incubator website recently, because I recently saw that they have a cybersecurity accelerator program, and in that same like I think their taskbar, they had the fashion program. So in that, I was just like it was eye-catching. Like I started looking at it, I started reading all the requirements stuff. It was really like good. Like and the program is really good too. Like I wanted to apply to that, like when I was like probably like 15, I was thinking about fashion design, but I didn't go to it. But yeah, like that's something really good, especially if we're doing something for like the ones that are disabled. That's a really good initiative. Like it's great work. It's amazing.
Thank you.
And sort of speaking to why now, why all of a sudden now, why wasn't that there before, when you think about that, and had an epiphany, and thank goodness for that, right? To discover,
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot of times in these beginning conversations, especially when talking to individuals who are fully sighted or who aren't as aware of different challenges that exist within the disability community, there's often a lot of shock that a product like this doesn't already exist. Or there are all of these aha moments where someone doesn't really consider the different challenges that might exist for other individuals when going through basic steps such as choosing clothing or identifying or wanting to feel more accepted within society when they're already stigmatized. And when it comes to disability, so many times with appearance, the first thing that you recognize about the person is that they do have a disability. But disabilities should not be that identifying factor. There's so much more to a person behind their disability. And so the research started in 2016, but it really didn't start to get the attention of the media until 2019. Out of nowhere, really, CTV reached out. They came across my project on my portfolio website. They wanted to do a feature on the importance of disability fashion and Canadian designers who are working to change this perception. And from there, that's when we joined the incubator, and we've been getting all of this attention. And I think really the world just wasn't prepared. We've had so many events take place, especially in 2020, that I think has really allowed the population as a whole to slow down and reevaluate their lives and really change their perceptions on different events and reprioritize. And I think that while this should have happened much long ago, at least now it is happening, and there's still so much work that can be done. And we're just going to continue to push that agenda further, start holding more people accountable, and make this a real change.
Very good. Very valid point. Yes.
Thank you.
Stephanie, did you want to jump in with anything? Stephanie's one of our guests from Bold Blind Beauty and lived experiences as well. And I wondered if you wanted to add anything in.
Well, I just wanted to add that, what Alexa's doing it's so powerful, especially for our community, because here in the US, 1 in 5 people are living with a disability. And quite honestly, as a person who is affected by disability myself, and I guess I could be classified as a person who has a hidden disability. If you wouldn't see me with my white cane, you wouldn't know that I'm blind. Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought.
That's good. I know we talked about this before, and it's just the work that you're doing, and uncovering sort of the principles that you've incorporated into your work through Bold Blind Beauty really spoke to me, and as far as in educating the public. And I wondered if you have a moment to sort of address what Bold Blind Beauty is about and the principles based on who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I created Bold Blind Beauty to empower blind and low vision women to embrace their beauty, to increase their confidence, to claim their power, and to boldly break barriers. That's essentially what the site is about. Today, to help further our message, our mission of improving humanity by changing the way we perceive one another, the site also features stories of people from around the world, from all walks of life, who are blind and low vision. And that is done to help people to understand the capabilities of blind and low vision people. I think one of the things I noticed almost immediately when I began using my white cane was that, people couldn't understand, well, why is this person using a white cane when obviously, they can see something. They're wearing heels, they're dressed nice, they're wearing makeup. They don't appear to be blind. And again, it's about perceptions. Just because a person looks a certain way or carries himself a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that things are the way an outsider might think that they should be. Beauty and fashion and all of these sort of abstract ideas are not just for people who aren't living with what I like to refer to the mass majority of the population who doesn't just have a disability. I like to refer to them, and I throw myself in there as well, as temporarily abled.
Yes.
All of us are temporarily abled until something happens, or perhaps we're born with a disability. But based on the research that I have done, the majority of people who acquire a disability acquire it sometime within their lifetime, either due to illness, injury, or some form of fashion, through that way. And the older we get, the more likely we are to acquire a disability, which is what happened to me. So I think we have to really, like some of the comments that were made here, just sort of change our thinking, the way we, look at people. I think we need to extend grace to people. I think, we need to, I wish we could strike the word normal out of our language. Because David, to your point,
Yeah.
there is no such thing as normal.
There is no such thing.
What is the meter for that?
Consecutive elections in Canada and the United States demonstrate there's no such thing as normal. So, it just isn't. And what you're saying is so very true, that at some point in your life, if you live long enough, you're going to experience some sort of a disability, or frankly, a condition is going to overtake you and suddenly take you out. Here in Canada today, we're acknowledging the passing of Wayne Gretzky's father at the age of 82. He was generally regarded or called Canada's uncle. Everyone admired him in so many ways. But he had an incremental mental condition where he couldn't remember things after a certain number of days. And I had the privilege of interviewing him on one occasion when I was at CP24. And it was a wonderful interview. And he shook hands with me at the very end. And as he walked, we went into commercial break, and he said, you know, I hope we get a chance to meet again. And he said, and if we do, I just need to tell you, I probably won't remember you. And I probably won't remember this interview, but I don't want you to be offended. I had such a lump in my throat. I couldn't believe it. I said, oh, Mr. Gretzky, it's, you know, perfectly fine. But, you know, he lived till 82 and got a chance to see, you know, basically all of his son's, you know, remarkable exploits. Meanwhile, in the same day, a football player that was an acquaintance of mine, Chris Schultz, otherwise healthy individual, just suddenly dropped dead at the age of 61. You know, so whether you're a person in their 80s who had a prolonged mental decline, or an apparently robust individual dropping dead 21 years earlier, who knows what is going to happen to us from day to day. And so there is no normal. There just isn't. There's a short continuum span, just a short little span, I should say, in our lives, if we're lucky, just a short little span of where you're not dealing with some mental, emotional, or physical condition that is limiting what you can do and getting worse day by day and is non-treatable. You're really, really fortunate if that's the case, but that's the distinct minority of people. It really is.
Well, yeah, and I think to your point, eventually all of us, 100% of us, are going to die. We all have
Those are the latest statistics. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, you know, from my perspective, I think it's important for us to focus on the moment and doing the best we can within each moment. Yes. You know, that's how I try to live my life.
Yes. Wisely.
Absolutely. I think everybody has a story, and I think coming to the table with that, always with that in mind, and being mindful that everyone has a story, and it is very momentary and very fleeting in many ways. So yeah, for sure. David, oh, please go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You know, I think it's one of the very, very few. My remarks now are in basis of a panel that I'm on next week, a presentation actually in Ottawa. I'll be here. That's a great thing about online. But you know, one of the very few benefits of COVID has been the tearing away of how persons with disabilities have been largely ignored by our society. And Statistics Canada, StatsCan, did everyone a tremendous service when they started to crank out the statistics, as we're now approaching, I think we're 3 or 4 days away from the first anniversary of the first death in Canada from COVID. Now, statistically, we're only a couple of hundred deaths away, not that we're looking forward to it, but only a couple of hundred deaths away in 1 year of reaching the halfway mark of the number of deaths of all of the Canadian soldiers in World War II. And that was 5 years and 8 months of battle. And so in 1 year, we're at the halfway point, effectively. But what StatsCan didn't say, as they went on and said, well, 81% of the deaths have been in seniors' homes or been long-term care facilities. And what they didn't say, however, was that the vast majority of the people in the seniors' homes are there because they're disabled. And virtually all of the people in the long-term care facilities are there. They're under 65. That's why they're in an LTC and not a seniors' home. They're there because of a disability of some sort or another. So what StatsCan and the rest of us, media and government, should be saying correctly in analyzing the COVID crisis is that 81% of the victims have been persons with disabilities. The remaining 19% have been from the able-bodied population. Now, when you express it that way, first of all, you get a much higher mark in my class than you would otherwise, like 9.5 out of 10, because it is an accurate statement. But it also brings things into perspective because it forces us to ask the question, well, why are we not saying it that way? And the answer is, I think, fairly straightforward, because if you say that the majority of deaths are disabled people in seniors' homes and the majority are in disabled people in long-term care facilities, then you invite the question, why? Why is the number that high? And the answer, unfortunately, is the failure of government policy on both the federal and the provincial level and the municipal level in combination. They've just not addressed the problem correctly in most jurisdictions, with the exception of New Brunswick, which have just had a handful of deaths. I understand, a much smaller population, but there have been a large number of seniors and long-term care facilities in the Greater Toronto area who over one full year have had no deaths whatsoever because they took proper precautions last January. And 3 of them our family is familiar with. One was started by my late parents in the early 1970s, called the Wexford in Scarborough. Another Shepherd Lodge up on Shepherd near Birchmount in Toronto. And the third is the place where my mother spent the final 2 years of her life, called the Claremont on Mount Pleasant at Davisville area. So why is it that these institutions have had 0 deaths? And the answer is really straightforward. They figured it out early. They kept the staff changed down to an absolute minimum, strict cleanliness protocols, and above all, they treated their residents in a thoughtful way. Were they kept from seeing family and loved ones? Yes, like everyone else, but they set up closed circuit television so that there were ways of them at least to interact. So it really, really raises a serious question going forward of why our governments on all 3 levels have not used the correct term to describe the victims of COVID. And I think from there, it gives us the opportunity, I hope, to come up with far more creative policies, which aren't that they're not complicated. They just require some thinking, will require some money, no question about that, but it's going to give us, I think, as a community, I hope, a better opportunity to know who some of these people are, to not just have them shoveled into, facilities that are just off in the sort of the sidelines of our society, which we just ignore, and try to incorporate them into our community in a way that we haven't in the past. Just because you're disabled and old does not mean that you should die of a condition when, if you lived in a completely different facility, you would have no chance of dying at all.
Very much so. That speaks to the heart right there, David.
Yeah.
Wow. Would there be, this is an opportunity to maybe ask a question of David, perhaps, surrounding that, or shall we carry on? I wondered, David, I'm just thinking just in terms of legislation previously in past years, and like the AODA, if you could speak to that, for example, and then and how this relates to our conversation now, even.
Well, it's ironic that the first year anniversary of the first death of COVID occurs on almost the same day as the second anniversary of the provincial government's response to my review of the third legislative review of the AODA. And unfortunately, in the 2 years that the government has had to address the recommendations that I made, they've taken exactly the same steps that the previous government under Kathleen Wynne did to the second review of the AODA, chaired by Mayo Moran of the University of Toronto, and exactly the same steps that the McGuinty government took in assessing the recommendations of the first legislative review of the AODA by the Honorable Charles Beer. And that is to do nothing, to virtually do nothing. The changes that have been made since the Beer report, the Mayo-Moran report, and my report have been tinkering around the edges. And yet the major recommendations to improve the quality of life of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of individuals in the province of Ontario have just been flat out ignored. And at least some of the deaths that occurred in Ontario related to COVID are because the recommendations, and if not the letter of the recommendations, then certainly the spirit of the recommendations, not just mine, but the same ones by Mayo Moran, the same ones by Charles Beer, because they're virtually all the same. They overlap, they intertwine with each other. But they do so because all three of us went out and interviewed dozens and dozens and hundreds of members of the community and listened to them about what their complaints were. And as a result, you know, you just have to say to yourself, well, then why have you not embraced these recommendations? And again, that goes back to, well, why do you not call the people as to who they are? And that is not residents of long-term care facilities and residents of seniors' homes, but disabled people who live in long-term care facilities, like my wife's first cousin, who is a man in his very early 50s, but he's been living, because he lives in a remote area, he's been living in a senior citizens home since he was in his early 40s. That's not right. It shouldn't be happening, and yet it is. And one only has to go online, and if I can't get it to come up immediately, I'll just skip on. But you know, you go on to Twitter these days, and I've been following it very, very closely. The laments and the sadness that is expressed by people with disabilities, their tweets are just heart-ripping. You know, hashtags like hashtag don't want to live, hashtag losing hope in Canada, hashtag giving up. You just go on. Here's one. It just says, I'm having a disability discrimination burnout moment. Would love to be able to do literally anything other than to fight for my survival and access for just one day. That was posted 2 hours ago.
Wow.
Here's one, a picture posted by Losing Hope in Canada from 22 hours ago. 22 hours ago, Calgary, CTVnews.ca, disabled man harassed when parking his accessible van. It just goes on like that. It just goes on and on and on, you know, and so I invite everyone, just, you know, at some point, go to some of those hashtags and just follow through and just see where it takes you. It's a story of real despair, and this should not be happening. And I think what it says, if I can just boil it all down, because I don't want to monopolize things, but what it says is this. I presume, like, this is all apolitical. You know, I mean, when I was Lieutenant Governor, I had 3 powers and 3 responsibilities. The first was as is the Queen, by the way, and as is the Governor General, our powers are described in exactly the same terms. The right to be consulted by government, the right to encourage, and the right to warn. And I said to people, you know, during my term of office that I employed all 3 on various occasions, but mostly the right to encourage and the right to warn. Well, I'm no longer in office. I don't have any right to demand that the provincial government consult with me on anything. If they wish to, that's fine, I'll talk to them, but I don't have the right. But I do carry that residual of authority, which I believe is valid, of the right to encourage and the right to warn. And it would be a simultaneous thing when I would say to government, it appears that we're going to be moving into an era where there could very well be more viruses. It just seems to be something about what's happening in nature. That just seems to be the case. But even if it's not, we've demonstrated that through mask wearing this winter, flu cases have been virtually zero. There has been no flu epidemic this year for the first time in decades. And they chalk it up to both isolation and mask wearing. Okay, so maybe we're going to continue. Maybe we need to encourage people next year, if not for COVID, then at least for flu. Don't wear a mask when you go out. Don't when you're bumping into strangers, etc. But it says more than anything else to us that we need to look at our medical healthcare system from top to bottom. We've been able to somehow find hundreds of billions of emergency dollars, with some reports indicating this week that Canadians, by and large, are, notwithstanding all the terrible pressures on business and adversities, are financially better off than before because of the amount pumped out by government. Well, we can afford to do that. If that's the case, we can afford to address our healthcare system and decide what it is that we want to do. And I would suggest that the first and foremost thing is to adopt the 3 policies that were adopted at the Shepherd Lodge, at the Claremont, and the Wexford, along with, I might say, most of the province of New Brunswick. And that is to raise the value of the personal support workers, the personal service workers who tend and take care of the disabled persons in LTCs and the disabled persons in seniors' homes, and give them a wage, give them a living that does not require them to take a second and a third job that takes them from one place to another, which spreads germs. You know, more than almost a year and a half ago, I had major surgery, which required the use of, after I came home, a personal support worker for bathing, for dressing, until I could recover. Because my brother-in-law runs a tool and die company and he had access to various equipment and supplies, I was able to get my PSW the N95 masks that he required because his employer was not able to provide them at the time. And you just go, what is wrong with this picture? And the answer is everything is wrong with this picture. So a lot needs to be done. And I believe it starts with let's properly identify the people who are most affected, and that is the persons with disabilities. That is the 81% of the fatalities of COVID, who in 1 year have just about reached the halfway mark of the total death toll for Canada in World War II.
It's really incredible. Wow. Questions from any of our guest attendants, Paul? Alexa, did you have something? That is really profound, David, when you put it in those terms, right? It really is the optics of that when you break it down is truly incredible. Stephanie, coming from the States, how would you speak to that in terms of it being parallel or quite opposite?
Well, in regards to COVID, honestly, I have been so fatigued with the news of COVID. I've tuned it out months ago, so I can't really speak to, you know, our numbers. What I can speak to is just the value of people with disabilities, and what David was saying about some of the folks that were using these hashtags on Twitter and the fight that they have to fight, you know, every day. That is our life, and that is real. Every single day is a battle. And it's one of the reasons why AIR, accessibility, inclusion, and representation is so important to Bold Blind Beauty, because unless you are affected by disability or know someone who's affected by disability, you can't really understand what it's like living in the body of someone who has a disability. I cannot speak on behalf of someone who is a wheelchair user or someone who has maybe perhaps some form of a a different type of disability, different than the one that I have. What I can speak to is the blindness aspect. And from my disability, I have to be on from the moment I wake up in the morning until I lay my head down at night. I am on hyper alert. I have to be, because, you know, unless I'm in my environment, my personal environment in my home, and even then I'm prone to fall, I'm prone to hurt myself in some form or fashion. The moment I leave here, I just don't know, you know, what's coming at me. Just walking my dog, for example, in the condominium complex I live in, I don't know, you know, if a car coming, you know, around the corner might not see me and hit me. I might not hear it because cars are quieter now, but these are some of the things that are very real that, you know, I, as a blind person, I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And it's not just me as a single individual, but when you look at us as a whole, there's millions, there's billions of people with disabilities around the world. It is an issue. And it does impact our society, but I think as a whole, we look at people with disabilities or people who are different from ourselves as different, and that is problematic. Othering people is problematic. And I can give you an example. Today, I was working on a blog post that just went live, and I had to look for some images. Now, it's not unusual for me to have to really search for images that represent the topic that I'm presenting. But when it focuses on disability specifically, that's very difficult. But for this particular blog post, it was just a blog post about gardening, but I wanted to represent a wide range of different people gardening. Okay, so some of the images were just people digging, some were preparing the ground. There was a woman that was planting. Well, the descriptions for those images were as such, and I have to be brutally honest here. One said a woman planting whatever. The other said an African American woman planting whatever. And then a third one said an Asian woman planting whatever. These are problematic because, and I understand categorizing, but when you look at, you know, our population as a whole, when we look at people, you know, when we look at the majority, we don't identify the majority because it's already assumed the majority are people, but everyone else has to be identified. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Totally. Othering, yeah, for sure. I love the term that you used, othering. I don't love the term, but I just the fact that you put it that way, because that's what it appears like, to othering. Another category, for example, you know.
Now, I've not heard the AIR acronym before. Again, Stephanie, what is that?
AIR. Okay, AIR is accessibility, inclusion, and representation.
Brilliant.
Great. Yeah. David, for those of who are here today that don't know, in terms of your career and the changes that you have seen, the positive changes, you know, being a reporter for, you know, 22 odd years at Citytv and becoming lieutenant governor. And as you progressed as a young person entering into your profession, how much of a change have you seen? Is it 20-year period, for example, even?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, amazing changes, and in other ways, almost no changes at all. That's the part that I find galling. Yeah. I teach this in my course where we begin the class by sending the students out. I send the class out on an assignment to two places that they're very familiar with, a place that they're very familiar with in the community. It can be anything. And another place where they're not familiar, they've never visited before. It can be a shopping center, it can be a theater, and this was much easier, of course, before COVID, because after that they had to be somewhat creative. But they were to, having gone through the basics of the course, identify areas of inaccessibility, barriers, and what did they see and what did they recognize possibly for the first time. And almost universally, they came back saying, I didn't realize this place. I've been going here for 20 years or 10 years or something, and I had no idea that it was so inaccessible. And one of the points that we get to in the class is that, and I really believe this to be true, the proliferation of blue wheelchair symbol signs in our society has led to a mistaken impression that what's inside is also accessible, and it's not. There are far too many cases where that is the situation. So that's the start point. Secondly, it's seen as the absolute minimum that's necessary for businesses to do to make a place accessible or to meet the standards of the AODA. There's no sense of them, I mean, I can't remember how many years ago it was now. Perhaps someone can refresh my memory. It might have been 7 or 8 years ago, but there was a collapse of a part of a mall in Elliott Lake, I believe it was, and which for the visitors online is way to the north and north of Thunder Bay in Ontario, essentially this mall was built into the rock face of the geography there, and water leakage had damaged it, and it finally just gave way. People have been complaining for years, but nothing had happened, so nobody did anything about it. And then finally, all of a sudden, a section of the mall just collapsed and several people were killed. So they did a review. Well, that triggered a review right across the province of individual towns sending their engineers out, taking a look and making sure that the places were safe. There's never, ever been anything remotely like that in terms of accessibility. There's never been an accessibility audit of this province or of this jurisdiction, just like not at all, not to meet the standards. And you go, well, how is that possible? And the follow-through question on that is, well, it's the same, if not necessarily the same people, but we had this several month stretch between the first wave of COVID and what was always being forecast that there was a second wave coming. And why did government not go out and inspect all of the seniors' homes, all of the long-term care facilities? They just didn't do it. They just didn't see it as important. But, again, it goes back to that notion of that we addressed earlier, that right from the very beginning. And I remember that first case in the early March of last year, where the first death occurred at the Lynn Valley Seniors Home in British Columbia. And my first thought, I'll self-admit with some degree of shame, thinking, especially as the next couple of cases came along, well, at least it's been contained to a senior citizen's home. That was my first thought. But it was only afterwards that I realized, no, wait a minute, it's not been contained, number one, and it's not just quote unquote seniors, it's disabled seniors. So much to do.
Yeah, no, for sure. For any of our guests, before David wraps up today, did you want to ask anything from David Onley? Ida Maria or Karina, Stephanie? Well, I'm thinking about a call to action then, David. That's what's speaking to mind. What would be a call to action for you to implore our people to?
I'd like to address it into the focus on the medical assistance in dying question, Bill C7. And for Stephanie, this is a major controversy going on in Canada at the present time. And there's a posting 3 hours ago from a lady who does a regular Twitter posting. Sarah Calero is her name. And her hashtags on this message were hashtag Bill C7, kill Bill C7, hashtag why us, hashtag medical assistance in dying, and so on and so on. And she said, it's a wonderful day to say disabled folks who are nowhere close to death should not be given the option of medically assisted death without also being given the option to live a sustainable life. And the cold reality is right now in Ontario and in all of the other provinces, we should be ashamed to say that there's a whole subset of our culture, persons on Ontario disability support payments, who are living substantially below the poverty line and have no way of getting out of it. And that's government policy. And it's not just, quote, the Ford government policy, because it was also the Wynne government and it was also the McGuinty government. And you just keep going back through time. We've just not addressed it. And I think that's the start point. Start with Bill C7, relate it to the ODSP amounts of $1,169 per person per month to survive. It's just not possible. And so those people, not surprisingly, plunge into despair, plunge into depression, and the government's response is not, oh, well, look, we will move heaven and earth to see if we can improve things for you. Instead, they say, oh, well, we're really sorry you're depressed. So here's a way, even though you're not dying of a medically certifiable condition, here's a way for you to die more quickly.
Wow.
Just, you know, goes without saying, I think. Something better is this the best we've got? You know, is this really the best? Is this Canada?
No, I appreciate that so much. I know, Stephanie, you had spoken to that from an American perspective as well, in terms of funding, when we spoke about your mother, you know, right? And yes, and having access to that, and you had to fight for that, like really hard to get that. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd love to get Stephanie's contacts, as I'd love her to be coming on the show too, not the show, my class as well.
I'd love it.
I'm sorry it's not until September, Stephanie, but you had so many brilliant insights. And I will leave you with the only blind joke I know, but I think you'll like it. And it's from a friend of mine who is blind, one of the great advocates. And I was speaking to him just last night, lawyer David Lepofsky, and his wife, she is sighted, but they decided to adopt a little girl who was blind. And he tells the great story about the power going out in their house at night, and it was getting later. And this was when their daughter was about 7 or 8. She's older now. And she said, Daddy, why does Mama always get upset when the power goes out? And he said, well, you see, dear, when the power goes out and everything goes black, Mommy becomes disabled. Isn't that great?
Light dependent.
Yep, absolutely. Light dependent. So, gotta leave with a smile.
Well, I am thrilled that you have made this connection as well, David, with I and for Stephanie, and we have just been thrilled as a guest. Thank you. I'm just been thinking about you for some time, and I had wanted to get you on as a guest for a while, and I've been following your career as well. I just love the work that you do and what you represent. And
well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll look forward to doing it again somewhere down the road.
That's great. Any questions before we go from Moksha Canada, Karina, or Ida Maria, Stephanie? No, I think everyone is good. We're going to be signing off the first session of our program. Oh, there's a question from Ida Maria. Go ahead. You just want to take your mute button off. And
yeah, I just wanted to say that I admire each of your stories, and I want to thank you for sharing it with me. I had a really good session today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ida Maria.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful backdrop, by the way, Ida Maria. I'm sure that's actually your room, and that's not some green screen add-on.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good.
I just had a question for iDesign. I was just wondering, is there like a TikTok account or a TikTok social media page for you guys? Because I feel like that would be a good platform.
So at the moment, no TikTok. We're on Instagram though. Haven't ventured onto TikTok yet though, but we might have to look into that.
Where do we find you on Instagram?
On Instagram, the @ is iDesign, and it's spelled AILLE. And the reason behind that, actually, David, is that I comes from the French verb aller, which means to move forward. So essentially everything that we're doing here at iDesign is the direction that the fashion industry needs to move forward into. Inclusion is at the forefront of where we need to be moving towards. And so then it's a nod to our Canadian culture. The founder of Braille is from France. And then just that connection through the pronunciation, I, is a direct relation to working directly with individuals with low vision, and then all of the Braille, and then that personal I, where our products are designed to increase empowerment and independence. So that's where the story comes from. So there's a lot of miscommunication sometimes where my name is Aille or that the company name is Aille Design, but it's iDesign, and I promise it has a way better story than just being my name.
Oh,
So that's how you can find us. Thank you, David.
I will. Thank you.
And we're doing a part 2 of accessibility for our next session as well too. So you're welcome to tune in to see what I and from iDesign, Alexa, Bold, Blind, and Beauty have to offer. So yeah, definitely stay in touch for sure. And we want to thank our guests for coming today. And we want to thank our guest speaker, David Onley. And please join us for all the Spotlight and community coming up. Follow us on social media, give us a like, tell your friends about us. We're all about shining light and all the wonderful work that's happening out there. Thank you to Moksha Canada for allowing this to happen, and to David Onley for being our guest today in the first session of Spotlight on Community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was great meeting you, David.
Likewise.